Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the first episode of Behind the App, where each month we'll be taking a deep dive into some of the coolest and most technical Salesforce Labs solutions. I'm Stephan Garcia, a Senior Developer Evangelist here at Salesforce, and I'll be introducing you to the creators behind some of these awesome apps. If you'd like to follow along during the program or ask us any questions before or after the session, you can tweet #BehindTheApp and we'll be sure to respond to your questions. So before we get started, what is Salesforce Labs, you might be asking? Well, in order to get to know Salesforce Labs, you first need to know the App Exchange. It's a marketplace where app developers all around the world can publish their Salesforce applications. They can either be full-scale apps that you can use to run part of your business, or even just a single component that might bring you a little bit more productivity. You can subscribe to those apps and install them right into your Salesforce org. Now, back to Salesforce Labs. Salesforce Labs is an internal program here at Salesforce where employees are encouraged to build production-ready apps and put them onto the App Exchange. For many years as a Salesforce developer myself, I've used so many Salesforce Labs apps in my projects because sometimes it can give you a quicker solution and not require you to rebuild something that already exists out there for free. Now, what's even best about Salesforce Labs is the fact that they are totally free. You can download the applications, install them in your org without having to worry about any subscription costs. Now, to top it off, all of the source code is available on GitHub for the Salesforce Labs solutions. And so if you pop into a listing, you can see here down at the bottom near the customization guides that you can link directly to the GitHub repository for that application. And you can go ahead and go in and dig into that code yourself. Maybe if you wanted to repurpose some of it within your environment or learn some of the things that the Salesforce developers internally have done within that code. One of the reasons that I personally got involved with Salesforce Labs is because I thought that it'd be a great way to give back to that community and to then start building out applications. Also, while working for Salesforce, it's great to keep your production-ready skills going and build these in solutions because it really makes you a better developer. So now that you have a bit of background, here's how the series is going to work. Each month, we're going to be inviting the creator of an app to come and discuss their solution. We're then going to go through and do a demo of the app and a technical walkthrough of the solution so we can understand some of the concepts behind it. And then lastly, we're going to present our segment called Solve for X, where we're going to be solving for some complex technical challenges within apps on Salesforce. For example, if we're solving for UI, we'll probably be looking at some Lightning Web components and the design patterns and technical challenges when faced in building the solution. Now, we wouldn't have these awesome apps if it weren't for awesome Salesforce employees who took the time and effort to build out these solutions for us. And this is going to be a great way to showcase and get to know some of those outstanding developers. And our first builder today is a person named Andrew Paterson. And Andrew is a technical architect at Salesforce in the UK. Andrew, welcome to the first episode of Behind the App. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, welcome everyone. Welcome, Stephan. Good to catch up again. Yeah, so I've been at Salesforce just over 4 years now. Got involved with Salesforce through an ex-colleague I used to work with, how I was moving back from Australia and was quizzing the UK job market, and he recommended to me joining the platform team at Salesforce, which I did. Been there since. It's been a great job.
Cool. I mean, what kind of work do you do on the platform team or as a technical architect?
Yeah, so on the platform team, or as a technical architect or a cloud architect, as we were last year, the role is essentially talking to customers that are looking to do something with Salesforce, expand what they're doing, or they're looking at net new customers. So it's explaining the platform, explaining how you build apps, explaining security, architecture, integration, and so on. So it's a great role, very varied. So every day, talk to a customer, and they've got different levels of Salesforce experience. So you're always hitting a new challenge or having to explain something in a new way.
Cool. So our other builder today is actually myself. Andrew and I built this app that we're going to be talking about together because we just happened to be on the same team back in the UK. And as I was transitioning to move back to the US, that'd be a great opportunity to just kind of work on something and get a couple of apps to market while there was a lot of downtime. What got you interested in building apps for Salesforce Labs?
Yeah, so what got me interested was essentially it's a large part of what I do. I'm quite a hands-on developer when talking to customers. Often they'll express the challenge they've got, and you always think, yeah, this is how you could solve that. Because I always find it's key to show them how it can be addressed rather than just telling them. And so through that, I built a lot of demos and realized over time that a lot of those demos, they end up kind of in an org. A year later, I'm looking for them, or I'm trying to reuse them, and thought this would be a great chance to actually start building out components that can be reused by a wider range of people.
Nice. So I think now would be a great time to introduce the first app for the series. That's going to be the multi-org security summary. Andrew, could you tell us a little bit about the app?
Yes, certainly. So inside setup in your org, you will have an area called health check, and that will tell you a set of scores that we measure against your settings, things like password reset, allowed number of login attempts you're allowed, and things like that. And it gives you a score across those and then summarizes it up across 38, 39 different settings. So what the multi-org security summary app does is it lets you collect that data from your child orgs and then send it to a central org where you can then start getting reporting across your whole organization. And what it also does, it does that on a daily basis. So the current one provides an at point in time view of the data. It doesn't show you history. Just lets you get that historical view and start tracking what's going on, what changes are affecting your score.
Nice. I mean, one thing that I saw this being a solution that really fits is taking quite a lot of data in some cases when you have large numbers of orgs within your setup, and really making it easy to analyze and digest that information and understand where there might be security shortfalls within an organization. And so I think that it's really a great way of presenting this data. Now, I wish that I could take credit for the inspiration of this app, but this was really all coming from your experience. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about where sort of this idea came from?
Yeah, certainly. I guess I'd like to take the inspiration and claim it myself, but it actually came from a customer. So we're on one of our weekly security catch-up calls as part of the sales cycle. And she just happened to mention that with their existing orgs, she was having to log into nearly 40 orgs to go and view this data and check the security settings. And the inspiration, I guess, was just hearing her say that and just the pain that she was expressing of what she was, she was happy to do it, I guess, in the sense of she was doing it. But it sounded to me like a problem that could be solved because the data was there. I mean, the tooling API, as I found out, provides that data. And so the inspiration was to just make it easy for her to go and get that data. And also with this customer, I wanted to show them how you could go and build apps quite quickly on the platform that aren't necessarily big, all-encompassing kind of healthcare apps or managing customers' complaints and things like that. It was actually just saying, oh, here's a problem you need to solve. Here's how you can solve that with components, an app, and some integration.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you could speak to a customer about this idea and then actually take it and build it out as a solution, package it, and distribute it. And I think that's a real testament to how great and easy it is to build solutions and apps like this on platform. I mean, do you have any examples of activities that you might work with a customer maybe to show them how to build apps on platform that this sort of plays into?
Yeah, it is part of our general sales cycle when it's relevant. So obviously sometimes it's not, but often when we're talking to IT and business and they kind of get the concept of Salesforce, they might not have seen it before. We have a technique called a build it now day or a bin day where we get a problem from the customer. You try and keep it kind of obviously within scope, not building a massive app. But the idea is they tell us that problem, it might be off of their backlog, and then we go away, plan out how we would build it, and then we sit there and show them how to build it in a day.
Yeah.
So, and we find that really powerful because it is the power of the platform that with some of these business challenges, it's actually relatively easy to build the app. It's just the thinking and capturing that thinking that's actually usually the challenge.
Yeah, I know when we were originally scoping out the solution, it seemed like it'd be a quick and easy build, but it quickly escalated, as you'll see, to quite a bit of code. But I think we're super happy with the end result there. Now moving from that, that's all brilliant. It's great to see sort of a real use case behind code and something that was built so that you can really understand why technical challenges were sort of fought against and ideas were made and fulfilled. And so when looking at the application itself, it's worth understanding what that core object model of the app is. And as we said earlier, it really revolves around those security health checks themselves in the org, and then each of those security health check risks that are available. And what we've done is we've created those as custom objects within Salesforce, so we can actually take that data and that metadata from the tooling API and then actually write that to objects. And then we've enriched it inside of the app by allowing you to associate users as admins to those specific orgs, that you create tasks to manage sort of the security settings and stuff around those orgs, and then even manage the security skills of those users so that you can ensure when you're putting a user in charge of the security of an org that they have the skills necessary to be dictating those settings and to be making those changes. Now, generally the idea behind the app was if we're working in a multi-org environment, one org has to be that central security hub within all of these orgs because we need somewhere to send the data. And every business will have that main org, I assume, that would be able to install the package and capture that data. And then we have all of our child orgs, some of maybe our other production orgs sandboxes that we want to then hook up to the app, where we can install the package and send all of the data to that central org for processing and analysis. And that's really sort of the core of the app is that data. And that was the biggest challenge up front, was getting the data in the right place, as we'll talk about later on in the program today. But I think it's just about time for a demo. So let's go ahead and jump into the multi-org security summary. And Andrew, could you tell us a bit about it? And let's do more of a technical walkthrough of the app and talk about some of its features.
Cool. So what we're looking at here is the overarching component that contains the functionality. So we have a Lightning Web component that contains our main application, if you want to call it that. It's got the title bar at the top where we can put some buttons to trigger various actions. Got a section underneath which is the header. So that summarizes the data below and provides you kind of reporting on what's down there. So here we're looking at average security score across all our orgs. We can see the number of open security tasks, things like that. And then the bottom section is kind of the filterable section where you can go and start drilling into data. So we're looking at today's date. We could go back a day if we wanted to look at the data, or we might just want to drill in and look at kind of poor scoring orgs, to filter down across our orgs and look at those where there's potential issues. So the global customer support org there, we can see there's a fair amount of issues that need to be looked at. And as we mouse across, we can actually see details about what that issue actually is. So here we've got click chat protections not enabled, actually disabled in this org. There's links to the knowledge article. And so what we might do here is we actually go and create a task to say, the relevant person, Stephan in this case, can you have a look at this? And maybe, we might assign it a low severity or a high severity, depending on what the actual thing is. And then we've created a task that someone can deal with.
So now I think let's go ahead and take a look at one of the org's details and drill into that detail view of the org. So we see the EMEA marketing org here has an 81, so that's a pretty high score compared to the rest of our orgs. Go ahead and take a look at those details. From there, we'll actually be able to see that full detail view of that EMEA marketing org and some statistics focused on this org itself. We can actually see the changes that are made live in this org. And this really flags up that when there's a change, the UI changes as well, that users can identify that there was an issue there and was made. I think the big idea behind this view was so that if sort of some program owner of security or some security officer who's owning this sort of main view and the central view of the security summary can then go and create a task when they see a change like this made. Now, one thing that we've also done within the app is created a couple of flow templates that you can use for alerting. So when a security health check comes in and it is a change in value from the previous health check, you can create alerts for people within the org that you can also then start automating some of those tasks and really keeping on top of changes in security there. On top of that, we also have the detail view, so we can drill into more of that classic view of those security settings and view that information in that table format. We can then go in and view the details of those tasks. We can close tasks, and then we can even view details of the admin who's been assigned to that org and ensure that they have the right skills necessary to own the security of this org. Is there anything else that you think we should take a look at within this page? Maybe the child view?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So it's being built in a way that the package you install it into the child and you install it into the parent. But obviously we're capturing that data in the child org. Then we have the component installed, we have the package installed. So we actually added the UI here where you can go and view the data in the child org itself. So whilst the overarching view is across all the orgs, you actually can go and see your security health check data on a daily basis updated inside your child org as well, which is a nice, easy way of leveraging that functionality we built and using it for two purposes.
Yeah, one thing that I quite like, it seems super simple but can be super complicated, is because we're actually pushing this data over to the central org using scheduled jobs, we can actually check the last status of the job as it was run and ensure that that sync is active. And if the sync ever drops, we can alert the user to know that that sync has been dropped. But we'll talk about some of that functionality as we get into the technical details. Thank you for that overview, Andrew. I think it's a really cool app and can provide a lot of benefit. I'm a particular fan of the user interface, which we'll talk about why as we get into the next section of the program. So that's it for the demo, and I think that gives us a really good overview around the application. But now, the cool part of the program today is the segment that we're going to be calling Solve for X, where we solve for specific technical challenges that we might face when building an app like this that's then distributed on the App Exchange. And today we're going to be solving for three things. We're going to be solving for the UI and understanding how we can build a complex yet responsive sort of chart for this information, for this data, that the users can interact with, that one that we were looking at a second ago. We're then going to solve for data and talk about how we've been able to get that health check data from the tooling API into the central org in a nice shape that we can work with in our components. And then lastly, we're going to solve for composition. I mean, as Andrew mentioned a few minutes ago, there are about 20 Lightning Web components in this, all being powered by a single container Lightning Web component. And so we want to talk about how we've composed the application and how we're managing those transactions in the orchestration around that main component. And so let's go ahead and start with the UI. Now, I'm going to talk about this because I don't know how much time I spent on getting this to work, because I was a real stickler for the responsiveness around this. But understanding how this chart works. It's really visual, it looks really cool, but it was also really complicated to successfully deliver. And what you have to understand is we have those 37 health check risks, and we then have that org score in the details. And if we talk about generally using a grid within the design system, or within a lot of sort of HTML grids and CSS grids that exist out there, we're talking in steps of 12. And so you can technically subdivide things into groups pretty well using the grid if they're divisible by 12, but this was not the case in this application. And so we had to find a way of really bringing down this UI and subdividing it in a way that we could make it responsive for what it is. Because what you're seeing here are just divs. Each of these is just a div with a color and with padding and spacing, so that we can actually trigger that out. Now, what we got to was actually breaking it down into a 1 of 6 and a 5 of 6, so that we can then at least define an area that we can work with, so that we don't have to worry about stretching and the responsiveness between these two areas, and that there was not any overflow that we had to worry about. Now, the way that we ended up achieving this was by actually going out and trying to understand how big that div was, and then calculating out the size and the width of the div, then dividing it by 6, and then getting that actual width space of this container. Bear in mind that we also have this lightning button here that we're using to trigger actions. And so that caused a lot of complications, but we were able to get there in the end. If we go ahead and look at the code, what we can see here is on the connected callback, we're actually adding an event listener to the window. And we've got a window resized function here that we're calling, where we're then going in and querying the div, and then setting the width, and then actually calculating out based on the number of rows and that window size, how to go and calculate that out. And it took a lot of tries, and I would have rather not had to hard code these numbers in, but this is just what we had to do in order to achieve that result. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at this UI here, if I go ahead and inspect the screen, we can play around with the sizing of that window. What you'll see is that every time that window resizes, it's going in and passing the value down and recalculating out the width of that section. And so that we get a window that fits the UI no matter how small someone's screen is. Although bear in mind things don't align properly, we've been able to get them to all align towards the center of that column as well as that window gets larger and smaller. And so what we're doing is, as I said, we're calculating out the width and then passing down a specific width value to each of these divs so that we can calculate that out. And we're really happy to achieve that, but that's something you definitely want to go and check out the code after today's talk to see how that was done, and maybe replicate that in some of your code. If you have a better way of doing it, please tweet us and let us know, because it'd be more than appreciated. Someone suggested using Canvas to do it, but in retrospect, I actually think going the div route for the orchestration that we're going to talk about in a minute, I think really helped us out. Now, the next bit I'm going to let Andrew talk about, because this is really his UI challenge in the application.
Yes, certainly. And actually on that one, if you do tweak with suggestions, we did try CSS and calculations in there. I can't remember why it didn't work. There was something frustrating that it almost did, but didn't quite do what was needed. So the popovers were also an interesting one, because where to put the popover is dependent on what you've just resized that
Yeah.
box to be. So this was again one of those ones where probably would have been easier in Aura times where you had a repeating component and then you had you could put your popover relative to that component. It's not quite relevant anymore in LWC.
Yeah, and I think from a performance perspective, to have just the one popover moving around, I think,
yeah,
is
exactly.
easier than having like
You could have
100.
badly solved it with a couple of hundred of popovers. So popping that popover up is essentially, as you mouse over, as you can see here, it will fire an event. So the on mouse over event passes up some data to the container, and then the container fires a custom event saying, "Hey, someone's just moused over me, and I need you to recalculate stuff." And then what it does, so the security summary, the overarching container will take that data, it will work out what item was moused over, it will get the position of that element, perform some calculations, and then it will tell the modal to appear and actually pass in the details of the kind of the positioning of where that element should be.
Yeah. So I think if we take a look at that, you can see here as we move our mouse over, it's important to note that this is one component that's just floating around the page essentially based on that positioning. So no matter where I'm hovering over, it's just recalculating that, and as we said, pushing that data back down. Were there any challenges that ended up arising in this?
Yeah, it was a bit fiddly just getting the actual mouse over correct, because you can see there if you mouse down, you have to get the position just right so that when the mouse goes down, it doesn't kind of drop away and appear again. And also on the first, I don't know if you remember this one, but we actually had the close button on this popover,
Yes.
which turned out to be the most frustrating thing in the world. As you tried to actually reach it and then hit close, and then it instantly popped up as the thing underneath it was appearing. So yeah, it was a bit of trial and error getting that working,
Yeah.
but that was more again just learning, I guess, the workaround we had to do around the resizing to then get those elements to position it.
And I think the other one that was quite interesting was having to account for the actual the length of the heading here on the page and adding that into our calculations, because we're actually having to go in and understand what the height of this div up here, and then subtract that from our positioning, because the positioning within the entire window isn't actually the same within the container of that component where it thinks it is. And so there were some interesting calculations we had to get the positioning there as well. Cool. So I think that's some really interesting stuff about the UI. Definitely go in and check out that code. There's a lot of it in there to go and play around with and explore. But now let's go ahead and talk about the data. And when we came up with this idea for the app, you came to me and said that you'd already been able to get the health check data out. And so a lot of this stuff you did before we actually started really building out the application. Can you tell us a little bit about getting that data from the tooling API?
Yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned earlier, it was quite one of those ones where you think, well, the data's visible somewhere in the the setup is showing it, so it must be available. And a bit of Google searching and searching the Salesforce docs led me to the tooling API, which, to be honest, up until this point, I'd never actually really looked at it. I knew it was there as a checkbox on the developer console, but I'd never really used it. And yeah, surprisingly, there's a whole bunch of data there that you can get to, and get to it though you have to run a SOQL query against an object that actually doesn't exist as an object in the org. But essentially for this one, there's two queries. It's get me the health check data, and then get me the risk data, which is each of the kind of the score elements we have. So those 37 other risk scores, if you like.
And then, so I know once we've gotten the data, what are we doing with the data once we get it from the tooling API?
Yeah, so this leverages, I guess, one of the features of having the same package installed into both orgs. So because we have that set up, it means we can type convert between things a lot easier. So what that means really is that we get the data from the tooling API. We do have to convert that JSON data to an Apex in Apex, and then store that into an object. But once we store that into our custom objects, we're able to create a custom payload object called health check payload that contains the two records we want and actually contains some other stuff around for the security settings. And then we can just JSON pretty that to get a JSON payload. We pass that through, and then we call our own web service in the parent org, and it's a simple case of deserializing that payload, and it does it. It's great. So not lots, avoids having to write lots of messy JSON code to handle some data.
I was surprised when we were doing some debugging around it how simple it actually was to accomplish. Now, some of the stuff that I was working on around the data was understanding how we can pass it from that child org into the parent org, and like Andrew just said, so we'd have the records in the parent org, in the child org, and then we'd have a matching child org record in that parent org, so that we knew which org it was matching to, because we have all of these child orgs that are going to be sending data across to the parent org. We needed to be able to validate and ensure that that was the correct org. And so what we're doing is on this child org record, which is the record for that org that we were looking at earlier when we selected that EMEA marketing org, we're then generating a token that we can use to validate that org and storing it in a custom metadata type for config on the child org. That way, when we pass this payload over via the custom REST endpoint, we can validate this token in the parent org to ensure that it's being associated to the right place and that everything's been configured properly before getting started. And what we're doing is scheduling it and running that batch every 24 hours so that we can take that job and push the data over from each child org just into that parent org. I mean, we did hit some challenges, though, in getting this working. I think we tried 4 or 5 different ways of doing the scheduling.
Yeah, it was one of those ones where you say to yourself, this is a nice 10-minute exercise, have a scheduled flow, use the new scheduled flow functionality and send the data across. Unfortunately, because we're hitting the tooling API, we need to be an actual user, and then the automated process is not an actual user.
Yeah.
And so we spent ages trying to work out why the code wasn't working and so on, and then obviously learned a lesson there around how security works in Salesforce. So we moved across to the Apex.
Yeah, also debugging across packages with your org installed while building, because we need multiple orgs to test and build out this app. So that had its own unique challenges there as well. But just the fact that the scheduled flows, we just assumed that you'd have a session ID. But as you said, they run via the automated process user who doesn't have a session ID. And so we ended up just having to write an Apex scheduler. And so we'll talk about in a second and show you some of the code that we wrote. But we ended up having to build a UI to schedule these batches and manage that 24-hour sync because we weren't able to do it with flows in that instance. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of this code. If we go into the org here, you can see here that we're invoking that first security endpoint. So we're going ahead and we're querying for the security health check. We're then going and getting the individual risk records here. From that, once we have all of that data, we're then actually going to create our security health check within the org, and then enqueue a job to then go and start pushing that data out. And that's really doing all of the heavy lifting in creating that and getting that into Salesforce. Now, I talked quickly about the scheduler, and I've actually recorded a quick take that should be released soon. So check out the Salesforce Developers YouTube to see some of the details of this. But if we go into the configuration here and manage the sync, what you can see here is we can actually schedule and reschedule this from the UI, that we can always have that org in sync. And what this is doing is it's just going in and queuing a scheduled job, and it always checking to see that that job exists every time the page renders so that we can keep on top of that. So I'll go ahead and reschedule this for tomorrow so that we don't get out of sync in that instance. But that was our workaround alternative to not being able to schedule a flow and do this. Now, the last technical challenge that we faced was solving for that composition. As I said, we had about 20 Lightning Web components, and getting them to all run within this container was a bit of a challenge. I mean, Andrew, this is one of your first really heavy Lightning Web component projects. What did you learn from building this type of and this scale of an application?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'll be honest, and I probably had the same thing with Aura. My initial thoughts when I started using it was, this is hard to do. It was, just jumping in and not looking at the documentation. But once you actually work through the exercises and, obviously trailheads there and the documentation and understand how some of this stuff comes together, it actually becomes quite quick and easy to build apps. I've always kind of been a bit mocked in the team because I've been stuck on Aura for probably a year and a half. I can see you
Yeah,
chuckling there.
and I did a lot of
But
that mocking.
yeah, but it's for me. It was always easier. The usual one, we have the same thing. We tell customers you need to change, and then you don't change yourself. But once I understood it and then actually did start building out this app, there were a few things that obviously I got wrong, and there were a few things I learned. But generally now, I think it's a lot quicker. I find it a lot quicker to build Lightning Web Components. And having just done the Lightning Web Components Super Badge, that's a really good way of learning what an app should be structured. So, going through that, I can already see a few things to go back and fix up in this this component.
I mean, thinking back to the Super Badge,
work better.
There is a lot of interesting composition there around the components and how they're laid out. I think that yes, I agree, we could learn from. But I guess in this multi-org security summary, we have that parent component here that's taking care of our state and managing state throughout. It's managing all of the data and processing, and then it's managing all of the events. So anything that occurs within the application itself is always being pushed back up to the parent to then go back down into the child components. And so we've got events up, properties down, standard sort of way that a lot of JavaScript apps are composed nowadays, and just really replicating that within Lightning Web Components. Looking at the application and identifying some of those components, I mean, one of the things that I did on the app was build sort of a universal header for the component. And so we have this heading here for the page. We have this heading that shows our org statistics. We have this heading here for this section. And what we have is one heading component throughout that picks up the state from the parent container, and then we'll define and create these headings for you based on the state that we're in or the type that's been designated, so that we're not having to rewrite a lot of this code, because this banner here showing the statistics is reused across multiple views. The page banner is reused across multiple views. This sort of card header is used across multiple views. So it wasn't worth having to rewrite all of that markup when, with just a little bit of JavaScript, I can make this dynamic based on the state. I know a lot of the work you did, Andrew, was on sort of the security summary view and managing the state around that.
Yeah, so the summary data there is pulled through from Apex using the Aura-enabled methods. Mm-hmm. And then that, depending on the state of the page we're on or what we've selected in the filters, it then just gets the appropriate data and renders either a list of records by the org or a list of records by the date. So on this view here, go and get me the last default 30 days worth of data, and then render that down the screen. Whereas on the other screen, we were getting based on the settings we had, go and get me the list of orgs. Render.
I think that's great. I mean, one of the ones that we can't see here, and it's probably too hard to demo, is I think the one that we always end up hitting is you install the application for the first time in a child org, and you forget that you've not taken account for any empty state. And so we then have to go back and retrofit to assume that there was no data and the org wasn't configured. And so we even have to manage the state all the way down to that. And it's something that you just have to really keep in mind, is that like the shape that your component takes in every environment. I think that's one of the biggest challenges of building apps is ensuring that you have every corner cut, every error squashed, and getting that onto the App Exchange. I don't even know how much time we spent debugging and finding these weird little things here and there.
Yeah, it's definitely the application evolved over time as we thought of things to add or change and so on. And obviously, with two people working on it across different time zones, there were changes made that that possibly you weren't aware of. So it was a bit painful on that, and I think it was definitely a learning exercise around just planning out at a top level what it's going to look like from the start. So as you say, the value's empty because it doesn't exist at this point, and debugging through to find that, and then realizing you have to code around it at the start. That was just I think that was just nature of the way we built the app.
Yeah,
probably
definitely
we evolved quite quickly.
Yeah. I mean, and that's great. And I think that really gives us a good overview of how we structured it and put that together. And so I think, obviously, go install multi-org security summary. If you have multiple orgs or even one org, it does work in a single org view in that instance anyway still. But I just wanted to say, just to finish up today's session, Andrew, being a Salesforce employee and then building an app really for distribution and production, what did you learn from this process of building for Salesforce Labs?
Yeah, I think the main one I learned was the difference between building a demo code and building, something which you want other people to use.
Mhm.
So, in a demo, you don't necessarily have to kind of finish off everything, and there's areas where you don't need to show that part of the application, in that state, so you don't have to worry about building that. But with this one, yeah, it was actually kind of going through and really working through everything, making sure it worked, testing it. Um, that was good. I think I learned a lot about LWC and building applications using the new kind of tooling we have. I got started on the Illuminated Cloud, which is a great product. I'd been using Visual Code before. That's also good, but I think for me, Illuminated Cloud was more used to the sort of development approach I'm used to back from my Java days, and just being able to deploy code and so on a lot easier. And yeah, I think it was just working with yourself was great. I think we had some great evenings and weekends of just one more a day and we'll finish this. But I think was
Yeah.
just that finessing the application.
Yeah, there was no
to
no
make it kind of
frustration whatsoever on any part through the process. Would you do it again? Do you have any ideas for apps that you want to build? Do you have?
no,
Are
yeah,
you ready to
certainly.
go?
I've got a few. I mean, as I mentioned, I actually cover FinServe, and so there's a few things around financial services cloud, little things I've built for demos just to kind of render the UI slightly differently. There's a few of those that I've kind of got in my head around as add-on to FSC to just kind of render things in a nicer manner. But yeah, the great thing is with the process we have is now I understand it, and I feel very confident in kind of coming up with ideas and building apps that hopefully will be useful for customers.
Yeah, I mean, so coming from because you've not come from a Salesforce background, you've come from a developer and technology background prior to joining Salesforce, and so I assume this is probably one of the first like sort of end-to-end things that you've built on Salesforce. Do you think doing this and building something for Labs has changed the way that you sort of build on Salesforce, like in a day-to-day basis now?
No, definitely. And again, I guess it's reiterating the having to build things and just actually planning out your application and knowing where you're going to stop. Because often with demos, you can kind of throw in some concepts that look nice, but actually, probably aren't overly relevant. This was trying to keep it all relevant to the application.
Cool. Great. I think that's brilliant. I mean, thank you for coming on today's session. It's been great to chat and catch up around some of the app, and we hope that everyone finds benefit from the code and that work that we've done on multi-org security summary. Just to give a shout out to our next session, Behind the App is going to be running on the last Thursday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and we're going to be looking at the Lightning File Explorer, a new solution that's been released on Salesforce Labs that allows you to sort of really enhance the way that you manage and view files within Salesforce. I know, Andrew, you were a fan of this one when we first saw it. What would you want to ask the builders of this app when I have them on in the next session?
No, definitely. This app is particularly covering some of the areas, say cover FinServe and healthcare at times. This one is a great app for customers that are storing multiple files on a record. So, in some of the healthcare use cases we see, there's hundreds of files. So this is a really nice way of finding those files on a record. What I'm looking forward to is actually how they did the tagging. So they had some custom tags you could add and so on. I think I'd like to understand how that works. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
Cool. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. As we stated earlier, if you have any questions for us, please follow us on Twitter or hashtag Behind the App. And we really hope to see you at the next session. Thank you.